It would just go to the city engineer to review the erosion control and stormwater. I'd take a look at the photometric. That would take 10 minutes. And then pulling building permits to actually start the construction of it. So it would not come back to council or plan commission.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bear?
I was here for the Plan Commission discussion of the east-west orientation, which I find really interesting, and I was intrigued by Mr. Sayre. I think you made comments at that meeting about how most of the buildings on that part of Verona Avenue are orientated to the street. And I'm curious if there's been, and maybe Mr. Manley, you touched on your time on the Plan Commission, the struggle with this. Was there a reason for including in that overlay district the east-west orientation that we know of? Is there some history there? And then I guess a procedural question, can we approve this if that's in place? So two separate questions there.
The second question, certainly the council can waive that or override what the ordinance is. Mr. Sayre, you want to respond to the first part, or do you want me to?
I could take a crack at it. I think Alderperson Manley can jump in if he has any comments, or the mayor can jump in too. And looking at the buildings out on Verona Avenue, buildings located mostly east of Lincoln Street, for the most part, are oriented towards the street. As you get towards the downtown, the buildings do fall on that true east-west orientation. The belief behind that is that in the downtown, more the core area, the rear lot lines actually run on a true east-west. On the east side of Verona Avenue, the lot lines run parallel with the street. They don't run on a true east-west. They run at an angle with the street itself. So the thought was that possibly it was put in place, especially in the downtown, due to the rear lot lines. How it applies to basically the entire Verona Avenue is probably a different story too, but at one point we did have two different overlay districts. We had, I think, a downtown overlay district, and we had the Verona Avenue overlay district. Those were combined a few years ago, and obviously this requirement was carried through in one entire overlay district that now applies to the entire length of Verona Avenue. I don't have a specific history behind it. I dug through the files. I couldn't find an exact reason why the east-west orientation was selected. It could have just been pick one. It could have just been because of the rear lot line issue in the downtown. I don't have a clear reason from a historical standpoint.
Mr. Yers?
I kind of want to echo Mr. Manley's comments from earlier. I was one of the four commissioners who voted to approve this with it oriented to the street. I think it fits the area much better. And I agree with Mr. Manley also in that I think this is a topic that we should revisit. Otherwise, as downtown already has some instances of it kind of being scattered of different ways, and as we try and really rebuild our downtown and our gateways into downtown, we should come up with some uniform way so that we don't have that disjointed look almost.
One additional comment on the east-west orientation. If you look at the map and how Hometown Circle is laid out, that also follows the highway. It follows East Verona Avenue. It doesn't follow what would have been the lot line there. So it becomes a lot more challenging for the applicant to put a building on that lot and have it follow the east-west orientation rather than following the street. Mr. Burns?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the city staff has asked our consultant who's working on the downtown study process to take a look at this issue. So that will be coming out as part of the redevelopment plan discussions for the downtown. And I think that's an appropriate time to revisit that requirement.
Are there further questions or comments on the motion? Seeing none, the motion is to approve with the one contingency in it. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
Nay.
And that motion carries, and Mr. Steiner voting no. Mr. Yers?
Yes, and our last agenda item for the Plan Commission tonight is a conceptual review of proposed plan development to construct 108 market rate apartment units and 111 senior housing units with Phase 3 of Prairie Oaks development. The applicant has submitted a request for a planned unit development concept review. The developer is proposing to construct 108 market rate apartments and 111 senior housing units east of Enterprise Drive and north of Cross Country Road. Architectural plans have not yet been submitted with the request, but the applicant has indicated the architecture will complement the existing buildings in the area. The council is encouraged to provide feedback and recommendations to the applicant on the proposal. Staff recommends that the construction phasing be included with the general development plan to provide clear direction to the applicant and staff. Along with reviewing the sequencing, and the council should determine how the multifamily units within this project count against the unit allocations of the city's residential development policy. That policy, which was adopted in September of 2012, established a target of 25 to 50 new multifamily units to be constructed each year. The policy also allows for exceptions for redevelopment projects in senior housing facilities. No formal motion is required for this. This is a conceptual review of the project.
Thank you, Mr. Yurs. Mr. Sayers, is there anything that you wanted to add before we have the applicant come forward? Okay. We'll do the same thing as we did at the, you aren't showing any diagrams or anything tonight?
No, not in addition to what was submitted.
Okay, all right, then you don't need to use the cordless mic in any way. So if you would, please identify yourself.
Yeah, my name is Justin Frame. I'm a landscape architectural site designer and planner with JSD Professional Services. I'm working with GCG Investment Group that is planning to develop, and own, and operate and maintain this property. We looked at the initial GDP that was submitted in 2005 that has since expired. We looked at the kind of core components of this plan, and we tried to maintain consistencies in the amount of units that were approved at that time and moving forward. We've also looked at, the overall density, open space requirements, and we've tried to take that plan in maintaining consistency in the amount of units. 261 were approved in 2005, 42 of which have been constructed in the condos that are present on Enterprise Drive, remaining 219 units that are left within that plan are consistent with the plan that we've submitted. We've also taken a look at pedestrian and recreational connectivity networks. And with that, recreational opportunities in the form of amenities for open space. It is the intent of the developer and our project team to enhance that initial GDP that was submitted in the form of recreational opportunities on site. The plan as it stands currently is looking at the opportunities and how the building configuration relates to open space, and that is really going to be the task of the next step in the general development plan, in looking at building lot configurations and the design opportunities and challenges with that. One of the reasons why we're here tonight is to gain some feedback and some input related to the phasing plan. This was an initial comment both from the Director of Planning and Plan Commission in how we want to approach the initial phasing plan. We are looking at 48 market rate units in Phase 1A for 2013, and we're looking at up to 36 to 40 market rate units for Phase 1B in 2014. And this coincides with the public improvements that were proposed in the initial GDP and carry forward and remain consistent with the initial GDP that we're planning to submit. So with that, we are looking for input both from a building lot configuration and overall a development approach, and the ultimate phasing build-out that we will be detailing, and in the unit allocation and the unit mix that we will be detailing from an architectural standpoint and an overall land use and density standpoint in the general development plan. With that, I will open it up to any questions from the council. We appreciate the time.
Questions or comments? Mr. Manley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a comment for you, a little bit of feedback. And that relates to looking at the map that was provided. There's a street that runs generally north-south that's labeled as Public Street A. And there are some buildings on the west side of Public Street A that have the proposed apartment buildings fronting along the street with parking behind those buildings, but yet on the east side of the street, um, in both with the, and it gets a little bit hard to read, but the 24 apartment buildings that are shaded in yellow, and then the other building in the northeast portion, there's a significant amount of parking along the roadway, and then the building is set back. And I wonder if you would consider, or if it's possible from a logistics standpoint, to orient the buildings closer to the road with the parking behind the building.
Good question. Appreciate that. We did take a look at this lot in a little bit more detail from how the underground parking access is configured on site. One of the main opportunities of this site is the open space that is presented both to the east and to the south. It is our intent not to reconfigure any of the detention pond, and one of the opportunities of this site, both from a resident standpoint and from an overall master plan standpoint of the residents as a whole, is the recreational opportunity that is presented to the south as this overlooks the detention pond, as it overlooks Redden Soccer Park. And one of the goals of that building placement was really to maximize kind of the orientation of the first, second floor balconies and living space that is presented to the east of that building face. And as you look at the parking and how that works, certainly it's a good objective to mass in public street A and create more of a kind of delineated urban streetscape. However, we felt the opportunity was far greater to place the building and really have these units take advantage of that open space in the rear. If we were to bring the building closer to public street A, we would be facing not only the first floor units directly to the street, similar to public street A, but also the rear balcony, or the rear units would then overlook a field of parking. In west edge of this street, we're kind of up against that constraint as it is, but as we looked at that lot, we really thought this was an opportunity to have some very, very marketable units that kind of take advantage of the open space.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments, Mr. Steiner?
Are you targeting older adults that their children are grown and gone, or people without children, or aged people who are looking for a home near that senior center for entertainment and
Close
hanging
to
out with their
downtown.
own?
Yeah, good question. As we began to look at kind of the lot in the unit allocation to each of these buildings, and then the overall master plan, certainly with the future phase development of the senior care building and the different levels of care that may be proposed in that building, one of the discussions was creating kind of a lifestyle development where there are options for a diverse mix of tenants in each of these buildings, not only from a floor plan standpoint, but number of bedrooms, number of square footage total in each unit. Again, the development group has a good reputation of building high quality developments that will certainly carry forward with this development. So as we look at that, it is our intent to provide a very diverse, attractive floor plan variation within the entire site plan build out that will attract not only perhaps the young single professional, but also a young professional family that may have a few children that ultimately may have an elderly parent in the senior center, that there's that kind of proximity to both Verona in context of the community, but also from a master plan standpoint of providing that transitional living arrangement, if you will, and providing those options. So it is our intent to target a very diverse mix of tenants, certainly, and I think that kind of builds on the community context of this area of Verona. We have a successful senior housing development. We have condos that have been fairly, you know, on the whole, successful in absorption and retention. We have, you know, multifamily market rate apartments that again have high absorption rates. So it is our intent to really continue that trend.
Mr. Yurs?
My question may be answered by the developer or possibly even staff. I'm really intrigued by a new senior facility here in town. I think that's one area where the city does need to look, and I want to thank Adam and other city staff for recognizing that, moving the city in that direction. Since this is kind of a fair amount of distance away from downtown, will there be transportation provided either by the city or by the developer to our senior center here in Verona, grocery store, pharmacy, or will there be no transportation provided?
Can I handle that from a public standpoint, and then I'll take it from...
Sure, I think I'll even take it from a developer standpoint. Usually most senior facilities, it depends on who's developing it. Many of them do provide transportation. Shuttle buses, some of them do that, and the larger ones especially do. So I think it would really depend on who that specific developer would be for that senior living facility. I'm not sure if the developer is going to plan on developing that themselves, or if the intent is to sell that piece off. I'm not sure. Maybe Justin could speak to that. From a city standpoint, I believe there is some shuttles. Are there shuttles to the senior center? Alderperson Steiner?
There are unpaid volunteers who step up and move people around, yes.
I think from a development standpoint, though, most developments like this, that people who do operate senior centers take care of that need for their residents. That's probably the reason they pay for it. So I would anticipate whoever would come in and do that would probably take care of that as well.
Mr. Burns?
Just wanted to add that there is limited transportation for certain things like meal programs for the senior center. That may be a possibility, but I know that that's very limited in the times that they're able to offer that currently.
Mr. Bear?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I see that this development has 3 potential exemptions. The one I'm curious about is the density exemption. So you're requesting 12.47 units per acre, and the code allows for 12 per acre. I'm curious if that's for all 219 units, or if that's just for the market or just for the senior housing.
Good question. We've taken a look at that, and again, that kind of carries forward from the initial GDP that was submitted in 2005. That does incorporate the entire master plan, or full build out, if you will. And one thing to note with this plan, so that there's no confusion, is that also includes the open space that is dedicated in the stormwater detention pond. So from an overall master plan standpoint, we're at 12.47, which is slightly over 12, and henceforth the exemption requested. As we've looked at that, you know, we are trying to create a recreationally connected development to, you know, the context that it lies within. And so looking at open space, it's our intention to maximize open space, provide the most connectivity in the form of pedestrian and bicycle vehicular connectivity, and then also safety from vehicular access. So again, it is slightly above the standard for density, for high density multifamily. However, we feel it is not, you know, out of proportion with the context.
Okay, that makes sense. And Mr. Sayre, your comment is this is minor. So does the fact that it includes the open space still would, you know, because it's open space, it's drainage pond, the density is higher for the space that's actually usable. Is that still considered minor?
How the developer has calculated the density is consistent with past developments.
Okay.
The ordinance does not identify net or gross density, so it doesn't really get specific enough to identify what type of density we're talking. It talks about it generally, but this is consistent how we've reviewed things in the past. It's also consistent with their previous plan development, which was approved back in 2005, as Justin kind of alluded to, and I can touch on that real quick, is there was a previous plan development that was approved. In 2005, it expired. Plan developments do expire after 5 years. If you don't complete the development or continue to develop, they expire, they go away. So that's why they're coming back today asking for, to kind of restart the process. So the number of units they're requesting is, I think it's the same number they requested in 2005, and they're just coming back to kind of restart the process and finish the development that started back in 2005.
Okay. And I appreciate what you said, the access, and it looks like there's a sidewalk that goes around, all the way around the property, and I think that was noted at the Plan Commission meeting as well, and that's great, and I thank you for including that. And thanks for your responses, both of you. Thank you.
Mr. Diaz?
I just had a few comments. I think the fact that it includes senior housing is great. I think there's definitely a need for that in Verona, and I think the density doesn't seem out of character for what's been approved in the past and what's in the area. I think that'll help retail and help encourage more retail in the area. I know this was brought up at the Plan Commission about potentially splitting one of the buildings that was near some of the neighbors, and if you could give that due consideration, that would be great. And then, yeah, everything about the project to me looks really good. And I just had a question for city staff. It was alluded to that we have different options for counting the number of units in the project, and I'm wondering if that could be laid out.
Mr. Sayre?
Different options for counting, you said?
Well, we have the targets towards 25 and 50 units, like.
The policy, the residential policy.
Right, so like what would our options be for that?
Well, and Bill could probably speak to this a little more because it was adopted under his tenure, but it's a policy that spells out a target rate, so it doesn't have a defined hard number. It has a target rate, I think, 25 to 50 units per year. As of right now in 2013, the city has approved 0 units. And one of the intentions in the plan development, or when that policy was created, was to look at apartment projects and multifamily projects under the plan development process and to set up some guidelines for the phasing of it. That's probably the reason why the developer had some very conceptual phasing plans, because they are looking for that feedback. Obviously, I suspect they'd want to build more than what's allowed by the policy, and they're asking for, what's the council's level of comfort regarding number of units per year, and even going forward as well. It's helpful with staff. For us, when we work with the developer, of how many units are going to be allowed or not, so everyone has a clear expectation, and that would be built into the next step of the plan development process, which is the GDP. The second issue that was in the report as well was talking about how does this count towards that overall number, and that ultimately comes down to a council decision or council feedback of what your feeling is and what your comfort level is regarding multifamily and the number of units that should be approved each year as well. So the policy is somewhat gray, since we haven't had to really deal with it yet, so we really haven't had any tests against it. The goal was 25 to 50. However, this does have a senior component as well. 53% of the units will be senior housing. That might play into it as well, because technically the policy says special consideration should be given to senior housing too. So there's a couple things I guess you can consider.
Gotcha. Thank you for that explanation. I guess in light of that, I would just like to say I'm fine with considering how much senior housing it includes, and considering that it was previously approved. I'm fine with the developer proceeding as they see fit, and however the construction schedule and market dictates.
Thank you, Mr. Diaz. Mr. Steiner, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Many of the residents in northern part of Enterprise, where you're at, are very concerned about the congestion that exists already for people who are trying to get out onto M or down to cross country to go to work. Will your development try to keep people from parking on the streets?
One thing that we looked at in one of the initial conversations we had with Alderperson Diaz was traffic. We discussed that in some detail, looking at both the kind of number of trips that are going to be increased in generation, and then also looking at perhaps how we approach parking from a from a site standpoint, from an underground standpoint, and then also from a street standpoint. Sometimes there is a benefit to on-street parking, public parking, both from a visitor standpoint, from increasing open space on a lot development, as well as traffic calming features. One thing that we looked at, and I think we hit on at Plan Commission, was looking at the number of residents that would be here. You know, one of the big factors of that, knowing the senior care facility will have over half of the units as planned or future phase, certainly that has a disproportionate number, substantially less trip generations per resident than, say, the market rate apartments. As we look at that, and I think it begs the question of an overall City of Verona, you know, comprehensive development plan, and once this does become built out, certainly the two access points we feel are significant and substantial enough to handle the increase in trip generation. We do understand the concern from neighbors that there is some congestion during peak hours, during events, but we feel that as it is planned, we don't foresee any traffic light improvements, so to speak, at Prairie Way or Prairie Oaks, and ultimately, as I see this with future development and perhaps a long-term development and connection to North High Point, that provides 3 outlets for the internal master plan that I think begins to work fairly well from a traffic standpoint. But as we get further into this process and as we request more feedback from both Plan Commission and Common Council, we will look at the input of how parking and traffic will relate to you know, on-street parking, and then ultimately surface parking and how it relates to the overall master plan. So,
Go ahead, Mr. Steiner.
My last question. The people who live in Harmony Hills have really been in the news lately with the McKinsey development, and they are very much concerned about these people driving through their neighborhood to leave and exit onto M to go north. And is there any way we can encourage these people to go south to Enterprise, down Enterprise to cross country, and then up to M, to keep them out of the neighborhood where these people have some pretty strong concerns?
Yeah, and again, I think as you look at you know, the ultimate build out and looking at the public improvements that are planned for the site, I think generally looking at the contingent that's going to be living in this master plan development is there will be more than one outlet, and certainly going north, I think it begins to just as you mentioned, become convenient to outlet into that neighborhood. But as you look at kind of the development there, and if they are coming, say, on Public Street, which would be Public Street B, a continuation onto Prairie Oaks Drive, where there is some density, I think is, if not more convenient from a straight shot standpoint into entering onto M, that I think will drive and split some of this connection. I think, you know, if you look at the southerly portion of the site and the 2 buildings that will outlet onto Prairie Way Boulevard, depending on logistics, again, it makes sense to come down cross country and exit onto M if you are heading anywhere in the Verona area, if you are working or living or doing your shopping in Verona events. But that is something that I think we can look at from a standpoint of internal access, from a lot development standpoint, perhaps creating some close connections so that we are kind of splitting the traffic demands to the south access point and also the north access point. And try to drive some balance there, I think is prudent. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Yours?
One question I have is, I know on the map it says Public Street B and Public Street A. Who plans on actually having ownership of those streets, the developer or the city?
Yeah, it's something we're certainly going to be working through, and as you look at the overall build out and the phasing plan and the construction phase that perhaps incorporates phase 1A, phase 1B, and public street improvements that would be necessary to facilitate that build out. It is at this point the intent to have those become dedicated to the public as they read on plan. And as we begin to negotiate that phasing component, it becomes critical from an economic standpoint from the developer's approach to look at the the economic model and how many units are developed at which time and when that coincides with the public street improvements. I think as we begin to break that down, as you look at those three major components, there needs to be some negotiation there as we begin to enter that final phase. So.
Yeah, that question just stems because I know in a couple other areas of the city we have some privately owned streets, and that has raised some public safety concerns of not only law enforcement but also fire and EMS. So I do hope that these become city-owned streets rather than developer-owned.
That is our initial intent.
Other questions or comments? Ms. Reiki?
At one of my listening sessions, a senior couple came and said that they were interested in patio communities. They haven't seen any in Wisconsin, and I'm wondering if you as a developer could explain why they don't exist and if it would be possible on a parcel of land such as this in Verona to build a patio community. He described it as smaller homes where a variety of ages of people could live, but where the landscaping and just maintenance of the yards would be offered by the developer or some sort of business, and not, but yet it would be a community of single-family homes that just a different kind of neighborhood that he said he hasn't seen in Wisconsin. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, certainly. Patio communities work well when you have certainly an abundance of well-connected parcels and land. As you look at this site from a standpoint of density, from an economic model, from a mix of unit allocation that we're looking at, from market rate, we have condos, and then we also have the senior component of the plan. As we look at kind of the densities and trying to maintain a density that fits within the economic model, it becomes difficult to create less dense development that would facilitate, say, more of a single-family styled approach to the overall master plan. With that, in developing already, like for example, if we look at the north lot, this lot already has some substantial constraints from a lot configuration standpoint, from an open space standpoint, from a parking standpoint. In looking at the density to accommodate that site, there are some serious challenges and constraints. We're looking at not a large parcel of master plan developed area, rather some smaller, heavily constrained sites that begin to lend some serious challenges to creating the density that begins to work from an economic standpoint, from a management standpoint. In looking at the management of a property this large, it is the direction of the developer to develop this and then maintain and manage this property as an investment. As you look at that, it really begins to lend itself to kind of a mid to higher level density to justify on-site that level of management that sometimes you see in some of those more smart design communities. So I don't know if that helps.
Other questions or comments? Ms. Doyle?
I'd just like to add that I'm encouraged in seeing more senior housing come to Verona, as I believe it's a nice option to have relatively more affordable housing options for our residents, and look forward to seeing more in regard to this project.
Appreciate that.
Other comments? I think the feedback that you're getting here is very comparable to what you received at the Plan Commission. There was, I think everybody likes the fact that there's some senior housing, not only some senior living there, but different levels of senior living. I think that that's very attractive. So overall, I'm very supportive of what I see and look forward to hearing more from you in the near future.
We appreciate the time from the council this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's no action required on this. So, Mr. Yurs, is there anything else from the Plan Commission?
No, we are done taking up your time, and sorry about the long list.
Not a problem. Thank you. Next, we have Finance Committee. Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under item 9B1, I'll make a motion to pay the bills in the amount of $505,669.91.
We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second?
I will second that motion.
Second by Ms. Doyle. Mr. Manley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The largest expenditure in the bills this month is a $145,501 payment to J.H. Findorf and Son, which is a payment for the well number 5 project.
Okay, are there questions for the Finance Committee or for staff? Seeing none, the motion before you is to approve the payment of bills in amount totaling $505,669.91. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that motion carries and the bills are paid. Mr. Manley?
Thank you. Under item 9B2, I'll make a motion to approve Resolution R-13-40, which approves a memorandum of understanding with the City of Fitchburg regarding the placement of analog tactical radio communication equipment for use by emergency service providers at a Verona site and subsequent use of such equipment.
We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Doyle. Mr. Manley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The brief explanation here is that this would be, in addition to the Danecom digital shared communication service that we have throughout Dane County, this would allow, this resolution, if we team up with Fitchburg, would allow the City of Verona to access Fitchburg's analog tactical radio equipment, which really is used in situations where you have either a large event involving fire services, involving multiple departments, or a large event involving law enforcement that involves multiple departments, and sort of allows for communications at that the digital system does not really adequately provide for responders. And as we discuss this amongst the Finance Committee today, it sounded like this would be to Verona's advantage to move forward with the City of Fitchburg and adopt this agreement. It would involve deployment of city-owned telecommunication equipment on the southeast water tower, which is already budgeted for, I believe, in the city's 2013 capital budget, as well as the deployment of a communication equipment at EPIC's, on EPIC's campus on one of their buildings. And by deploying those two pieces of equipment, that would adequately, combined with the 3 towers that Fitchburg has, allow our police and our fire services to have the tactical radio communications that they would need in the event that they're responding to a large incident in our city. So we thought that it made sense, and we gave our unanimous recommendation, and I ask that the full council would adopt this resolution as well.
We do have a motion and a second. Are there any questions from the council? Seeing none, the motion is to approve Resolution R-13-040. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Mr. Manley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under item 9B3, I'll make a motion to approve a professional services agreement with Architectural Design Group LLC, 5 Bugles Design, for architectural services for the new fire and EMS facility.
We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Reekie. Mr. Manley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The terms of the professional services agreement were contained in the packet, so I won't go through them, other than to highlight what is perhaps the most important provision and one that reflects a change that was insisted upon by Mr. Burns and our legal counsel, and I think this is a very favorable change from the city's position, and that is that the agreement continues to reflect a 4.9% fee to 5 Bugles, but that amount is capped at a not-to-exceed amount of $348,000.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. Are there questions or comments from the council? Questions or comments? Seeing none, the motion before you is to approve a professional services agreement with Architectural Group LLC 5 Bugles Design for architectural services for the new fire and EMS facility. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Mr. Manley?
Thank you. Under item 9B4, I will make a motion to proceed with a public hearing, which is the next step in the process, with respect to a draft needs assessment for a fire facility impact fee.
We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second?
I will second that.
Second by Ms. Doyle. Mr. Manley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The draft needs assessment for a fire facility impact fee, which was compiled by Baker Tilly, was included in the packet. Perhaps the most important provision of that needs assessment is found on page 12, which actually spells out the proposed impact fees, those being for a single family development $310, for a multifamily development $213 per unit, and for a non-residential facility a fire impact fee of $2.10 per $1,000 of estimated value. As was explained by city staff, the next step in this process involves, I believe, involves a public hearing, and the Finance Committee voted unanimously to direct staff to move forward with a public hearing process.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. Are there any questions or comments? Mr. Burns?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that state statutes identify the process you need to use to adopt an impact fee. The needs assessment is a component of that. That needs assessment needs to be on file with the city clerk's office prior to the scheduling of a public hearing for a certain period of time. Based on the calendar, if the council were to direct us to proceed with a public hearing, the earliest date that we could do that would be our council meeting on October 14th. And I did check with Vicki Hellenbrand at Baker Tilly that prepared the report, and she would be available that evening to present the report as well as answer questions if there's interest in proceeding that way.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Questions or comments from the council? Seeing none, the motion before you is to proceed then with the public hearing. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Mr. Manley, is there anything else from the Finance Committee?
There is nothing further, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. Next, we'll move on to Public Works, Sewer, and Water Committee. Mr. Diaz, please.
Sure. Alder McGilfrey was absent and excused from Public Works, so I'm temporarily taking over as chair. There was a discussion regarding Resolution R13-041 for approving a development agreement for Cathedral Point, Locust Edition Phase 1. I think you've all seen it in your packet, and this has kind of been an ongoing thing. They would like to get started on work as soon as possible. The committee recommended approval, and I'd like to make a motion to approve Resolution R-13-041.
We have a motion by Mr. Diaz. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Baer. Questions or comments? Questions or comments on the resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor of Resolution R-13-041 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Is there anything else from Public Works, Sewer, and Water?
Nope.
All right, thank you, Mr. Diaz. We are then on Public Safety and Welfare Committee. Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under item 9D1, I will make a motion to approve an application for a temporary Class B license for the 5th annual chili cook-off on Saturday, September 14th from John Finseth of the Verona Optimus.
We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Mr. Bear. Mr. Manley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is and actually I misspoke. Our agenda says 5th annual, and it's actually the 6th annual. It's an event that's well known to the city. It's a good event, one that we've not had trouble with. And the permit, should the city approve it this evening, and I would encourage us to do that, would allow them to sell beer at their chili cook-off fundraiser from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., but in reality, that'll probably really be around 11 a.m. to 3 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. Are there questions from the council? No questions or comments? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Mr. Manley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under item 9D2, I'll make a motion to approve an application for a temporary Class B beer license for a mud run to be held on Sunday, October 27th, 2013, from Mike O'Brien of Ice Inc.
We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second? Second. Second by Mr. Yurs. Mr. Manley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This again is an event that I think is in its 4th year, if not the 5th year. And it's a mud run that is a day-long event, and it incorporates a mud run the day prior, also for kids. But what we have before us is the beer permit for the Sunday event, and it's for a great cause. It raises money for the Eagle's Nest to address some of the equipment and mechanical needs at that facility, and we gave our unanimous recommendation in favor of this event and this license, and hope that the body will do the same.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. Are there questions of the committee or staff? Mr. Yurs?
This isn't a question, more it's a comment really. I just want to say, you know, the applicant is, Mr. O'Brien, is very appreciative of our allowing these events to take place. He told us earlier this evening that if we did not do these items, the ice rink would have certainly been closed years ago. And I personally know from working at the elementary school, many elementary school boys who love their hockey, and it's a great way to keep them kind of on a straight and narrow, and it gives them something to work for. So I really hope we all support it.
Thank you, Mr. Yurs. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Mr. Manley?
Thank you. Under item 9D3, I'll make a motion to approve an application for a special event permit for the Verona High School Homecoming Parade to occur on Friday, October 4th of this year.
We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Bear. Mr. Manley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we're all familiar with the very short route that for this parade. It does involve a temporary and very short duration closure of Main Street, which is why we're here to grant the school a permit, but something that we do every year, and I don't think anybody believes it's terribly disruptive, and it's a lot of fun for the kids and for the community, so I hope we all support it.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Mr. Manley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 9D4 on our agenda was an issue that received some discussion at the Public Safety and Welfare Committee earlier this evening, and the committee chose to postpone action on that item until we could obtain additional information. And so I don't think we really need a motion or any action, but I would just sort of defer this until after the Public Safety and Welfare Committee is able to have that next meeting.
That works. Mr. Diaz?
What were the concerns or missing information?
The request was related to additional information from the city's insurance company in order to answer questions about the city granting a beer and wine permit for activity to occur in a city building.
Further questions or comments? Seeing none, there is no action on that. Anything else from Public Safety and Welfare Committee?
Nothing further, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. We'll move on then to new business. We have approval of operator licenses. Ms. Lynch, please.
A list was distributed to each of you with 9 applicants on it. However, please note that one of the applicants applied for the previous item, which has not yet been approved. So when approving these operators licenses, you may want to make that contingent upon the event being approved.
Thank you, Ms. Lynch. Are there any motions at this time? Mr. Manley?
I'll make a motion to approve as presented with the contingency noted by Ms. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Yers. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no, and that motion carries. Next, we have an update on intergovernmental agreement with the City of Madison. Mr. Burns, if you would, please.
Yes, thank you. The city in 1996 entered into an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Madison regarding planning and community separation areas. That agreement was a 20-year agreement, so we are coming up on the time period for consideration of that agreement. It does include a 1-year notice period if any party indicates that they're interested in making changes on this. Some of the key terms of the agreement includes a joint planning area where Verona and Madison would share items for comment from the other municipality within that planning area. It also includes a community separation area, which includes a landscaped buffer that would extend from the intersection of County Highway M and County Highway PD, 1,000 feet in each direction, and requires a 300-foot landscaped buffer in that area. And then it also includes the identification of County Highway PD as the separation line between the two communities, extending through the intersection of County Highway M and PD to the west to Shady Oak Lane, with properties to the south of that line being in the City of Verona future growth area, and to the north being in the area for the City of Madison. As the city began working on updating our North Neighborhood Plan, which includes property adjacent and within the area covered by this agreement, we've started some discussions with Madison staff regarding that buffer area, and if it continues to be the best way to handle that, or if there's other options for handling that community separation area. So we put this item on the agenda just to make sure that the council was aware that this agreement is in place, and that's an item that we will be looking at as part of the North Neighborhood Plan. The city planner and myself have a meeting scheduled with staff at the City of Madison later this week, specifically to talk about that buffer area. At this point, we have not had any discussions about the boundary agreement or other aspects of the agreement. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. We're available to answer any questions, or if you have any thoughts at this point, we'd be happy for any feedback. In discussing this item with the mayor in preparation for this agenda, we did identify that this is perhaps a topic that we want to schedule for a future meeting, perhaps a committee of the whole discussion. But given the discussions going on with Madison, we at least wanted to provide the update this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Questions or comments? Mr. Manley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess if we're going to talk about this at another meeting, that's fine, and I'll be brief, but I think it's fair to say that from my perspective, if there is a 1-year clause in the agreement that requires us to notify the city of our interest in modifying the agreement on a going forward basis, I think it's to the city's advantage to make that notification, even if we ultimately decided that we didn't want to change it, and I think we should change it, but even if we decided we didn't, I think it makes sense for us to preserve our rights and ability to make the change. I'd also just note that the 300-foot landscape buffer requirement, I think, imposes an undue burden on future development in the North Corridor on the City of Verona. whereas because of geography, as much as anything else, particularly for the area west of Main Street, and given the pond and the University Ridge Golf Course and the wetlands that are located there, that land is undevelopable for the city of Madison anyway. So for them to agree to a landscape buffer in an area that will permanently be a landscape buffer is, the city of Madison giving us the sleeves from their vest. I guess I would really like to see us as a city take a look at whether or not that, given the growth, the current and future and projected growth along the Highway PD corridor, whether or not it makes sense to city taxpayers and our overall development in the city to continue to maintain a 300-foot landscape buffer along County Highway PD.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. And that's part of the reason I had the conversation with Mr. Burns, that we get this on the next agenda for the Committee of the Whole, and we want to do that as soon as we possibly can so we can have these conversations. Other questions or comments on the update? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on then. Next, we have discussion and possible action regarding Local 311 claims regarding the new City of Verona Fire Department. Mr. Burns, if you would, please.
Yeah, so at the previous council meeting, there was discussion about the item that's included under old business this evening regarding utilization of funds for the fire department recruitment costs. And there were some questions that were raised about potential claims or liability issues related to the hiring process for the city fire department. The city attorney has been asked to research those items and is present this evening and available to discuss those items with the council. This is noticed to allow the council to convene into closed session to confer with legal counsel, and staff would recommend that the council take that opportunity to have that discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Is Mr. Manley?
I'd like to make a motion to convene in closed session as authorized by section 19.85 paren 1 paren G of the Wisconsin statutes for the purpose of conferring with City of Verona legal counsel, who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the city with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved.
We have a motion to go into closed session. Is there a second? Is there a second?
Second.
A second by Mr. Yurs. This motion requires a roll call vote. I'll have the clerk read the roll. Ms. Lynch, if you would, please.
Alderperson Bear.
Aye.
Alderperson Diaz.
No.
Alderperson Doyle. Alderperson Manley.
Aye.
Alderperson Reekie.
No.
Alderperson Steiner.
Aye.
And Alderperson Yurs.
Aye.
The roll call vote passes. It's 5-2, and we are now in closed session. We are back in open session. We are now under old business. There was no action taken under the prior business, under new business. We have discussion and possible action regarding authorization or authorizing the utilization of funds for the fire department recruitment costs. So, Mr. Diaz?
I just had a comment in regard to something that was said earlier. I would like to point out that Local 311 did not endorse in any of the city council races this past election. And I would just think it would be nice if people could vote on how we spend city money without the insinuation being made of our motives, especially from somebody who, looking at his financial report, received money from all over the county. Thank you.
I'll make a motion.
I'm sorry. Mr. Steiner, your motion is to?
What you want.
That's what I want. You better be careful with that.
What'd you say?
It's authorizing the utilization of funds for the fire department recruitment costs.
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Steiner. Is there a second? seconded by Mr. Manley. We are now open for discussion on that motion. Mr. Yurs?
First of all, I'd like to state, my conscience has been torn on this for the past 2 weeks and even further. One half of me despises this process. I think there has been some not misinformation, but different information is given at different times, which concerns me. However, on the other hand, I feel bound by state law to let the PFC do their job, and I also feel that the city has a right to check in background checks and just verify other things, which the vast majority of this money is going towards. So I've reluctantly come to the decision to vote in favor of giving the funding. However, I would like to make 2 charges. One would be to the PFC. I sincerely hope they exercise all of their authority in the oversight of this process. There have been accusations and questions that I think need their guidance, and make sure that this process isn't taken advantage of. Secondly, I'd like to make a charge to the chief. We've stated many times, and we've gone over it many times, I sincerely hope that this process isn't being used on your part to try and get rid of people. This is not going to be a silver bullet. The issues that the fire department face now are going to keep on. One piece of advice I've gotten from someone I really respect said, when there are problems, if you're not trying to fix the problem, you are part of the problem. So, Chief, I'm asking you to stand up and lead. Take this department where it can go. We have wonderful people working there currently. They do a great job, and they've even told me personally that a lot of these problems could be fixed by strong leadership. There's no more room left under the rug at the fire department. It's time we've had consistent leadership, and I congratulated you on your appointment to this position. When you got it, I stood up and made sure that we looked at comparables for salary, which ended up in an increase in your wages. I put faith in you, and that faith, I hope, can continue as we move forward. So please, stand up and lead your department. We still have to work with the current staff no matter what happens until January 1. And if those problems are there, they need to be working on getting fixed rather than just left alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yurs. Other comments, questions? Mr. Diaz?
2 things. One, I'd like to request a roll call vote for this vote, just because it seems like we've had some issues with the voice vote. It might be easier that way. And then the second thing is I will be voting against the funding. I don't think it's a good use of city funds, and so I'm voting against it.
Thank you, Mr. Diaz. Other questions, comments? Mr. Bear?
I'll second the motion for a roll call vote. I think that's prudent in this case. I'd like to, I think, first of all, thank everyone who's been part of this process. I think we've had a very healthy debate, and I think we've improved things from where we started. And I really want to thank the firefighters for coming to these meetings and showing your faces and being involved. I appreciate that. I know you've taken time away from your families and your other obligations to be here. And I also want to thank Ms. Newton and all of the Police and Fire Commission members, the commissioners, for their time and for coming to these meetings and for serving the city as volunteers. And I really appreciate that. I think we all owe them a debt for providing that service, and also to the chief for providing us a good service as the fire chief. I stand by what I said at our last meeting about this process, that I think it's unfair, inequitable, and costly, potentially very costly. And I think that those issues we need to be conscious of. And I also think there is a role for us, a very clear role for us here, provided in the state statutes in Chapter 62.12, Section 6, which is funds, appropriations, and debts, and in the process for city funds to be allocated. And Section A says, unless otherwise provided by law, city funds shall be paid out by the authority of the council. And section C says no debt shall be contracted against the city nor evidence thereof given unless authorized by a majority vote of the members of the council. So there's clearly a role here for us, and some have said that maybe we shouldn't be involved in this and that we're trying to make it political, but that's absolutely not the case. I think there's both a statutory role for us here and a sort of an oversight role as well. I would be willing certainly to fund the things that the city needs to do to protect itself, to verify that transferring these firefighters over, that they've got the licenses and everything, certifications they need to prove they're firefighters and go through whatever exams the Police and Fire Commission thinks is necessary. And I've been consistent on that. I'd be happy to fund that process. But this process, the open hiring process, that's unfair because someone could lose, there's the potential that someone could lose their job through this process without any sort of due process, strikes me as inherently unfair. It's also inequitable that we transferred the chief over, but didn't give that same respect to these firefighters necessarily. And potentially costly because if we do happen to hire someone else, there could be costs to train a new firefighter on top of the funds that are being discussed today. So I can't support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bear. Other questions, comments? Not seeing any. A roll call vote has been requested. I'll have the clerk read the roll. Ms. Lynch, please.
Alderperson Bear?
Nay.
Alderperson Diaz?
No.
Alderperson Doyle?
No.
Alderperson Manley?
Aye.
Alderperson Reekie?
No.
Alderperson Steiner?
Aye.
Alderperson Yurs?
Aye.
And the motion fails 4-3. We have, moving on the agenda then, we have announcements. Are there any announcements this evening? Mr. Steiner?
Thanks, Mayor. The Verona Area Community Theater has announced their first production, 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, coming out in October. And the Children's Theater will be doing the best Christmas collection ever. So if you want to get your season tickets, please contact the VACT either by telephone or online. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner. Other announcements this evening? The only other one that I wanted to mention is just a reminder that the Verona Optimists have their chili cookout on Saturday morning at the Verona Fire Station. So the public is welcome. With that, there being no other announcements, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Diaz. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Yurs. All in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And that motion carries. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.